right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining me again on a Tuesday evening. And our real trash talk presentation will start now. So welcome to our information session on real trash talk, presented today by Dante Swinton and me. I'm Stephanie Compton, and we're both of the Clean Air Baltimore Coalition. And we're joined today with Councilwoman Felicia Porter of District 10. And I believe we also will have James Alston of the Westbrook Community Development Center, where they'll have an opportunity to talk after the presentation. And that's before we'll open it up for Q&A. And for your informed consent, this will be recorded and the recording will be held on our Facebook page so that you can rewatch it in the future and share with those that are unable to attend tonight. All right. So what is incineration? So this is our solid waste management within the city. You know, it's that big smokestack that says Baltimore on the side of it. That's our incinerator. That's where our trash goes. And incinerators exist to manage trash. Who wants to deal with trash? Nobody. So these dirty industries sell their lazy, dirty, and inefficient technology and make it sound good by making up the term waste to energy, better known as waste of energy. And because of our low participation rate with recycling, that includes paper, glass, aluminum, food waste, mattresses, couches, electronics, and other household items are still discarded in the trash. And we end up burning recyclables as well as other toxic items at the incinerator, which causes a huge impact on public health, especially on the air quality for those that are nearest the incinerator. So I want to take a moment to address what incineration looks like in Baltimore. And in the chat, if you can drop in a hand or raise your hand and show, I want to see hands for how many people in this chat have asthma, know someone with asthma, if you know your kids have asthma. So our trash journey begins with the curbside collection of the green trash bin. It's then trucked to the aggregation site and eventually it's delivered to the incinerator downtown. Go ahead, Dante.
All right, so here we are, winning dirty. Win Waste, they changed their name from Wheelabrator, you've heard that probably in recent years, to Win Waste earlier this year. So they're just constantly winning now, I guess. But also people will like to reference the incinerator as Bresco because that's the original name. But it's the largest stationary air polluter in the entire city. And just to give you an idea of that, next slide, please. In 2017, the most recent data we have from the pollution that comes from that incinerator was #1 in hydrochloric acid, very toxic. #1 in sulfur dioxide, which contributes to asthma. #1 in lead. We know how impactful lead can be throughout the city. #1 in nitrogen oxides also contributes to asthma and create ozone. #1 in carbon monoxide. #2 in mercury. We know how toxic that is. And if you remember dissecting frogs or earthworms or anything like that in middle school or high school, it also releases formaldehyde. It was the third largest formaldehyde into the air in 2017. And as you see at the bottom there, it's #1 in carbon dioxide for all stationary sources in the city. Next slide, please. And so just to give you an idea, it is the #1 air polluter in the city. Thank you, Josie, for putting that out there. #1 air polluter, stationary air polluter in the city. Now, just to make sure that you can kind of grasp just how impactful this facility is, what I've done is compare it to the annual car pollution or car. I've made it to where you can understand that its pollution can be comparable to cars because they like to say, oh, worry about cars, don't worry about us. Well, okay. So for sulfur dioxide, it takes over 1.7 million cars to equal the amount of sulfur dioxide that they put into the air. For PM 2.5, another contributor to asthma, heart disease, and stroke, takes over 500,000 cars to equal the amount of PM 2.5 it releases into the air. And as for CO2, you can see it takes over 141,000 cars to equal that amount. So it is a very large polluter. It may be one source of many polluters, but it still contributes to the situation in Baltimore when it comes to dirty air. Next slide, please.
Come in.
All right, so we need to handle this ash, yo. So whenever you burn trash, you get toxic ash. And for every 100 tons of trash that you burn, you get 30 tons of toxic ash. And so if it doesn't go the air, if the toxins do not actually go out of the smokestack, they get concentrated into the ash, and then that has to be taken somewhere. So it gets trucked over to the Quarantine Road landfill, which is just north of Curtis Bay. And it's been that way, this kind of dual system of burning it at the incinerator, then trucking the ash to the landfill for the last 36 years. And then now the workers have to deal with it. It could blow into the community, could blow into the waterway. There are various issues with dealing with incinerator ash, and it should be in a hazardous waste landfill, but that's a topic for another day. Next slide, please. All right, we've been burning. We've been burning. Thanks to Beyonce for hooking us up there with a little introduction. As you can see from 2019, there's a lot of trash that goes to that incinerator, but you'll notice that while there's over 400,000 that comes from Baltimore City, only a little bit under half of that is collected by DPW. The rest comes from like private haulers, from apartment complexes, condos, things like that. But as you can see, even Baltimore County, Anne Arundel, Howard, Montgomery, they send trash there. So we're a dumping ground for these surrounding counties, but also you even have smaller amounts, but still amounts nevertheless, coming from several states, even as far as Georgia. So it's just maddening to think that we're going to lean on another on this facility for a number of years into the future when other people get to lean on it and pollute our air, which is just incredibly unjust. Next slide, please. All right, now Drake is very happy that at least 75% of what we dispose of is recyclable or compostable, but he's not as happy with the fact that Baltimore only recycles about 15% of what we dispose. Now, you might ask yourself, why so low? Well, we've decided, as I mentioned a moment ago, that we're going to lean on this incinerator. Let's just burn everything. It's all right, we got to get it out of people's homes. We got to get it off the streets. Let's just burn, burn, burn. And when you lean on that, you're not going to be able to create an atmosphere where folks actually do recycle, do compost. And so everyone just tosses the stuff in the trash can to get it away. And then it comes back as air pollution or the toxic ash at the landfill. The city's never bothered to distribute free recycling carts in the past, and they still charge for them, $12 for a bin that's not even half the size of the trash can. And there's been no mass education plan on recycling ever in this city. And so when you add all those up, you have a very low recycling rate, you have a very low participation rate. Next slide, please. All right, so in 2018, the city hired a consultant, DPW in particular, to develop a plan to reduce trash in Baltimore. Now, generally, good idea, but there are problems with that plan, which became known as Less Waste, Better Baltimore. For one, zero waste is not the focus. The idea is to say, let's say if you wanted to buy a house, like I will buy a house in 20 years, like just this slow, very slow, methodical effort to get to that house 20 years from now. That's essentially what the less waste, better Baltimore plan is. When in actuality, you could start instituting a lot of these policies within a year to a year and a half that would set Baltimore on a path for zero waste, creating more jobs, cleaning the air and the like. So that's a huge issue with the plan. Further, it leans on the continuation of using the trash incinerator. Like I said, it's 36 years old. For now, with this new 10-year contract that ex-Mayor Young unfortunately decided to agree to, they're trying to push it out to 46 years old. And no incinerators, or only one, as I recall, has ever lasted 46 years in the country. So the idea that we're going to try to get this into its elderly age and continue to be our main source of waste management is ridiculous. But Former council president, now Mayor Scott, was not a fan of the 10-year extension. He would much rather us move towards zero waste. He has said that that was the last contract that the city would have with the Wind Waste company, and we're going to hold him to it. And his transition report recommends that we actually go towards zero waste by removing as much waste as possible from DPW being sent there every year by 2024. But also the plan kind of minimizes the impact of education on recycling rates. It basically doesn't underscore or state how important it is to actually engage communities, talk to folks, say, hey, this is the reason why we need to go in this direction, and actually provide the access to that knowledge for communities. In fact, a city like Memphis, another city of color, about 60,000 or so more people than us, they realized that issue of folks not having a true education engagement for recycling. And when they did that, lo and behold, their average daily recycling rates nearly tripled in terms of tonnage that they collected. So that's a really impactful thing. They also gave everyone a free recycling cart to make that happen. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Roll out. Roll out. So the blue carts are going to be rolling out sometime soon. Now, they were originally planned for this past July. It's now August 3rd. So tell me in the chat, have you received your new blue bin yet? These new blue bins are going to be the same size as the green trash bins that we currently have. However, there is an issue for residents in public housing because currently there is no recycling available for curbside pickup in public housing. So we're leaving these residents out of participating in the citywide goal to divert 75% of Baltimore's waste stream that is recyclable and compostable. So how do we expect to get a higher recycling rate from 15% if we're not including all of our residents? So for those of us that do get a recycling cart, what should we be recycling? So paper, that's printer paper, newspaper, magazines, cardboard without the tape, and food boxes, cans, soda, food, plastics. Numbers indicate resin, not that it's recyclable. I know it's confusing, but definitely 1 and 2 plastics are ones that we really want to be recycling because they've got a valuable market. It's important that we clean the bottles first. Also, these plastics include cleaning bottles, medicine bottles, lotion bottles, yogurt containers, and then bottles that are both plastic and glass. It's important too to keep those lids attached. Metal tops from beer or other pop-offs are not recyclable. It's a good rule of thumb to avoid discarding items for recycling that are smaller than a credit card, other than paper, and that's to avoid damage to the sorting machines. Like the lids and the bottles to jars, they should be attached to their respective containers instead of discarding them separately. So what not to throw in the bin, plastic bags. They can cause damage to the recycling machines. And while it's okay to store your recyclables in bags, you must first remove them from the plastic bag before placing them in your recycling curbside cart. Not everything that should be diverted from the green trash bin should go into the blue recycling bin. Some items need to be responsibly managed, like hazardous items. So if you have unused household cleaners that have corrosive ingredients like bleach or Drano, those should be dropped at the household hazardous waste site drop-off. And as long as those bottles are empty, then you can recycle them in the curbside bin. Household hazardous items like light bulbs, batteries, electronics, so anything with a cord, and paints are all hazardous items that should be dropped off at participating sites located throughout the city. We really don't want these items ending up at the incinerator because when burned, they emit those toxic elements into the air, but they don't belong in the blue bin either. So please manage these toxic items responsibly. And to further protect the value of these recyclable items, it's important that we clean them out first. So that way they don't get refused and then they don't end up getting burned at the incinerator. Dante can talk more about the value of these and how they're profitable a little bit later on. Super exciting that DPW has embraced a new composting pilot because as much as 30% of what we throw away can be diverted from curbside trash and into compost. So you can either start composting in your backyard or you can collect it in a bin that you then drop off at one of the DPW drop-off locations. I'm going to share a link to the chat for the composting drop-off locations that are designated by DPW. And if you'd like more information on how to backyard compost, please reach out and I can coordinate a training session with the folks from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. So again, I'll be dropping those links in the chat for the drop-off locations and for more information on how to get started composting. So compostable items are any food scraps that don't contain meat. Avoiding meat in your backyard compost is for a couple of reasons. Mainly it's to avoid rodents and other animals, but also the heat of the compost needs to be maintained at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time, and that's so that it can kill any pathogens. And that's why you want to avoid meat stuff. Compostable items are still toxic laden, and those toxins do not disappear once broken down into compost. So these compostable items are an example of greenwashing and should be avoided at all costs because they're not actually compostable in this sense and are toxic. So when I'm talking about compostable items, I'm talking about the cups, the tableware, anything that's not actually a food item that is labeled as compostable is what I mean there. So what is zero waste? Sustainably managing our resources so that we're not burning. Burning trash is burning jobs and the ability to get reusable items into the local circular economy. So zero waste means more jobs because for every one landfill or incineration job, there's as much as 30 times more jobs in recycling and exponentially more jobs in reuse. It's the opportunity for local control and the community to have a say in how we manage our waste streams that align with protecting human health.
All right, so thank you for that, Steph. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the zero waste hierarchy. So Steph gave you kind of an introduction of what it means when we say zero waste. Obviously, there's so much stuff out there that we have to deal with in some capacity. Now, we talked about how 75% of what we dispose is recyclable or compostable. Well, that means that 25% of it isn't. And so when it comes to the zero waste hierarchy, the rethink and redesign is the most important aspect of it because we still need to handle that 25%. It has to go somewhere. We need to do something else instead of it being something that can't be recycled, can't be reused, can't be composted. But as you can see, recycling and compost is the fourth thing down on this list. You need to reduce and reuse first, because if you minimize the level of material that's going into the waste stream in the first place, then you avoid more stuff that could go to an incinerator, that could go to a landfill. Same with reuse. There are restaurants, for example, one out in San Francisco that during the pandemic, they started reusing or providing reuse plates and things like that for the food that they would deliver to folks, and then they would get that washed, bring it back, do the whole thing all over again. Actually minimizing what stuff can go into the stream is super critical. But then obviously you still need to recycle, still need to compost, and you start recovering material at these facilities that we'll talk about in a little bit about what it actually looks like when we move away from the incinerator. But as you can see right at the bottom, unacceptable, any sort of incineration or waste to energy, which is their term to make themselves sound sexier, when in actuality, they're nowhere close to it. So if you hear that term, it's just another mask for incineration, and they're still burning the trash. They're still producing air pollution, producing ash that has to be handled, and things of that nature. But again, just from the top, got to rethink and redesign, and then we build our way down and avoid the red part, which is the unacceptable bit. Next slide, please. All right, so as Steph mentioned, when we're talking jobs, we got to talk about the idea of building out a zero waste economy, a circular economy. As she mentioned, with incineration, you get about 1 job per 10,000 tons of material that you handle. Landfilling could get 4 to 6, but as you can see, you get to recycling, you start to get about 36 jobs per 10,000 tons of material, a significant boost. But the holy grail is reuse and remanufacturing. You get 300 jobs per 10,000 tons of material when you're actually recovering your electronics, recovering your glass, recovering your plastics, things like that, and actually rebuilding this material into new products. That is a very powerful tool in actually providing jobs for the city. In fact, next slide, please. According to the Fair Development Plan for Zero Waste that our fantastic allied group, South Baltimore Community Land Trust, had put together, at least 1,800 jobs would be created in Baltimore City by actually shifting to a zero waste or circular economy is another term you'll hear when we talk about this type of stuff. So think of the impact 1,800 jobs would have on potentially 1,800 families in the city. Think of the level of poverty and desperation that already existed prior to the pandemic, but has been enhanced because of it. The frustration of so many families and the struggle of so many families trying to get back out of this as we slowly move away from COVID-19, although things are kind of going the opposite direction right now. But this would be one of the fastest ways to build out more jobs for our city, and that's super powerful. Okay, so for these next couple of graphs, real quick, the main thing is to look at all the stuff that gets made up or that makes up the waste that gets sent to Win Waste every year. So that tonnage I showed you earlier, now it's been broken down into the different types of stuff that are going to be in that waste. So you got your paper and your paperboard, cardboard, plastics, metals, food, and the like. But if we started shifting that away, you'll start seeing that giant 422,000 tons start to shrink. So on the right here is what's called a material recovery facility, or MRF. This is the one out in San Francisco. It has a 450,000 ton capacity per year. And notice that that's a bit larger than the amount that the city and public and privately sent to the incinerator in 2019. But its capital costs are about $41 million, and that'll come into play in a little bit, and operational about 11 million, but it ends up being cheaper in the end. And we'll talk about that in a second. Next slide, please. Now, as you can see, we went from about 400 something thousand down to about 280 something thousand tons of waste. A large chunk of that is organics, like Steph talked about, whether it's food, yard waste. Those types of things could go to an institutional composting facility. Now, there are companies out there that even would build their own so long as we gave them the organic material to compost. So even though that capital cost there could be $13 million for a 120,000 ton facility, we may not even foot that bill. It would just be the delivery of the organics to that facility, and would be a significant amount of that waste that used to go to Win Waste. Next slide, please. All right, so we keep shrinking. We're sub 180 now. For this section, wood, rubber, leather, textiles, and glass. There are existing and there can be new small businesses that are handling glass. For example, we're working on the development of a glass recovery business for bottled glass in the city. Hopefully we can get that underway end of this year, start of next year. So that's an option. There are also building renovations that you could involve this recovered glass that's currently being tossed out. Glass is infinitely recyclable, but right now we're barely collecting 15% of what is disposed, which is ridiculous. But think about for rubber, leather, and textiles, you've got your Goodwills, you've got other small businesses. You could have industrial uses for the cloth, for the rubber, things like that. Like there are ways to utilize that material instead of burning it. When we get to wood, you've got Camp Small, which is the city's wood waste spot right now. You've got Second Chance that does a lot of collection of furniture and things of that nature that come from homes and gives them a second home. Baltimore Works does a lot of educational aspects and workforce training, which is awesome. Urban Farms could use it for chicken coops or anything else. Your building renovations and even new small businesses with that too. There are just so many avenues that do not require you to burn the material. And that's why we have to think outside the box of incineration and landfilling. Next slide, please. And then now, we've shrunk it sub 120,000 tons, and that's huge. That's a big difference. Now, with that remaining amount, what we could do until we do more is expand, or is to send that to the landfill, which is already in the process of being expanded. The city's already accounted for the $56 million for the first phase. The second phase is actually $43 million, so nearly $100 million to expand our landfill. But that's not to say that we have to send it there. That's just what we could do if, say, the incinerator were gone tomorrow. Next slide, please. But to that point, more waste actually can be diverted. We can do more community composting. If you've never been down to Curtis Bay to visit the Baltimore Compost Collective in Filbert Street Garden, beautiful place, lots of animals, lots of good folks there, working, composting, all that good stuff. Check it out. There's Black Yield Institute in Cherry Hill doing similar stuff. And they're awesome people. There's Baltimore Compost Cab, where you can actually request that your compost get picked up every week from them, which is great. There's anaerobic digestion, which can break down compost organic material at a higher heat than a regular compost pile would. So you can get rid of those pathogens, can create more compost, can create natural gas, things like that. But you can also do animal feed, support the parks, more building renovation. Mattress recycling is a thing that continues to expand in the country. There are a number of states that are starting to put in policies to make sure that those don't end up in landfills or incinerators as well. There's a lot of material within them that can be used for other things. They won't be used as a mattress again necessarily, but it will be a new product. And then obviously additional avenues. So there's just so many ways that we can divert this material, and we just have to keep investing in them, moving towards them. Next slide, please. All right, so the biggest thing about these graphs or what have you is that $56 million I talked about a moment ago, that's phase one of the landfill expansion. Then that 43 above it, that's the phase two. But that big $74 million chunk is a new transfer station. And what that transfer station would be responsible for is to ship our waste elsewhere. So if you remember, there were a lot of places that were shipping their waste to us. That transfer station would make us do the reverse. And we don't want that. We don't want to put our burden on other communities. So we would rather go the zero waste path on the right side, where you've got that $41 million for a recycling facility, 13 for the composting facility, add the recycling bins, composting bins, the education program, which only costs about $1.5 million of a truly robust one for that first year, and then a little bit less subsequent years. Like that's $50 million cheaper to build out the zero waste aspect as opposed to the status quo aspect. Next slide, please. So this is the operational. So like talking about salaries and things like that. You can see that they're almost similar, except that zero waste is still slightly cheaper. But if you look at that giant red section, the $10 million, that's the amount of money we spend every year already burning trash. Keep in mind that all of that material I just talked about is valuable. In fact, at least $31 million of material is within that 420 some thousand tons that we burned at the incinerator in 2019. So we are literally burning money and burning jobs, as Steph said earlier as well. So why would you continue to do that when in actuality you could lift up a lot of communities, a lot of families with diverting that waste out of an incinerator, out of a landfill, and creating a much more sustainable future? And so that's the type of stuff that we advocate for. And obviously we'll talk more about this after the councilwoman speaks, but that's where we are.
All right, so I leave with a call to action to divert as much waste as possible from the green cart that ends up at the incinerator. So if you're able to transport your compost, you can utilize the compost drop-off through DPW and at farmers markets, or you can start composting in your backyard or your nearest community garden. We can roll out this aggressive plan in the next year. We don't need to wait until the incinerator contract is over in 10 years, because that's assuming this old failing facility won't fail before then. And we need the zero waste plan now, and it's feasible with aggressive action in building out the zero waste infrastructure through recycling and composting. And if you are interested in joining us, reach out to us. Those are emails for me and Dante. If you're not already following us on Facebook, do so now. There's the link to our Facebook. And if someone can put that in the chat for me, so that way you can follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. And for those that are interested in joining us with volunteer opportunities, if you reach out, I can send you the invitation to join us on our Slack channel. And our next presentation is going to be 2 weeks from today. Join us for Rebuilding Baltimore, an information session on deconstruction. I'll also include the links to the chat to register on Zoom, and also you can share with your friends on Facebook. This will be live streamed again on Facebook. All right, that's it for the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing now.
All right, so now we're going to have the councilwoman from District 10, Felicia Porter, speak and just give us, well, actually, I see that James is here. So what we'll do is we'll actually have James speak a bit first about his experience living in Westport, and talk about the incinerator and related things. And then we'll go to the councilwoman, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Thank you, Dante. I was just sitting here snacking. Uh, the cardboard here that I'm going to be conscious about disposing in the recycling bin. So I encourage others to do the same. Just be conscious of it.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So my name is James Alston. I was born and bred in Westport. It is the community that houses one of Maryland's largest incinerators that we just talked about, that Dante and Steph just talked about. Wheelabrator, or now the new name is, when is it? When something? But yeah, for at least 3 decades, my family has called Westport home, and a few of us still remain here. I would like to consider myself a community activist, focusing on holistic development for South Baltimore communities, particularly supporting work surrounding the development of social support systems, infrastructure improvements, public health, and other quality of life initiatives. I have lived here, Westport, long enough to see at least 2 generations endure the intentional or unintentional egregious practices of various industries involved with energy production, glass making, corrugation, incineration, and other heavy industry. So I speak from experience. For parents, this endurance sort of was a necessary sacrifice to provide, a means of support for families, money. And I honor their sacrifice. But the saying goes, if I knew then what I knew now, perhaps the outcome would be different. Perhaps they would still be here. After being exposed to information surrounding pollution in South Baltimore, doing research about environmental racism, I felt the need to insert my voice in various political spaces where public health concerns of Black and Brown people could potentially be heard. It is much as I could have done to attempt to create a better quality of life for residents in South Baltimore, that being current and future generations, ensuring that the life outcomes are just as good as those who do not live in the direct pathway of one of Maryland's largest incinerators. I have been somewhat disappointed that after years of battle in that political space, we still have an egregious edifice known as Wheelabrator or wind waste still in our backyard. But I believe hope for a better environment is revived or restored by focusing efforts on things that you just mentioned, like recycling and composting, material recovery, and other measures that help reduce the reliance on the industry that might be reducing the number of years, for each of our residents here. COVID is enough for us to bear, has been and still is, without the additional burden of excessive pollution. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for the time and the space, to speak out on behalf of myself and residents of South Baltimore.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate that. And I'm really glad you lifted that up. I mean, that's the things like Westport, Curtis Bay, even communities in like West Baltimore and East Baltimore, places that had levels of industry impact them over years and years, that have more or less been left behind, lots of brown fields, things like that, not actually doing the right and just work to build out a stronger community, which also means getting rid of these polluters. It has not been a thing in the city, and it just hasn't. Like and if it has, to whatever extent that it has, it was to clear out the space for more well-to-do folks around the harbor and things like that. There's never been a full-on investment in the communities of color in the city. And Not a lot of people are going to want to live near an incinerator, near a giant manufacturing plant, whatever it may be. So it's just important to remember that when we do move on from this trash incinerator, that Westport community members have the say as to what the future of that space in their community looks like, and not some crazy investors that are wanting to build a new hotel on top of the casino or whatever it may be. So all that being said, I will pass it on to Councilwoman Porter from District 10, covers Curtis Bay, Cherry Hill, Westport, where the incinerator is, all that, all those communities. So, Councilwoman.
Thank you so much, Dante and Mr. Austin. I just want to elevate what you just discussed. For a number of years, Black bodies have been used in a way that we have a considerable reduction in our quality of life. As it relates to environmental justice, as it relates to pollution, as it relates to public health issues. And as we move forward, under my administration, under Mayor Scott's administration, we have been prioritizing environmental sustainability. We have been prioritizing moving towards zero waste and really having a clear understanding that incineration is not the goal for Baltimore. Not the goal for Baltimore, as we are seeing in other cities. And we are coming up not only with public health measures to substantiate that claim, but also we are myth busting some of the economic myths that come as a result of people really not understanding what zero waste is and how, 10 to 20 to 30 years down the line, we are not only building up people and building up communities, but we're also building a new economy that goes forward 10 to 20 to 30 years down the line. And, you said something that my grandmother used to say, if we knew better, we would do better. And so, I mean, you didn't say it like that, but that's how she said it. But that is what, when we're talking about zero waste, that is the mentality that we're moving forward with these communities, such as Curtis Bay, such as Westport, many of the communities that are represented in South Baltimore, not just those directly within the incinerator, but I have made the case to the administration that the communities surrounding the communities that are directly under the incinerator are reaping some of those drastic effects as well. So we're talking about your Pigtown, we're talking about your Locust Point, we're talking about your Violaville and Morrow Park. I think sometimes people forget that wind travels. They think that it's just within their respective neighborhoods and communities. And so as a public health scientist myself, I've been able to provide epidemiological data that supports not only when traveling, but also the drastic effects, not only as it relates to a person's public health, but also the drastic reduction in the quality of life, again, generationally down the line, as we have seen here in Baltimore. And so, Dante, I'm going to step off my soapbox real quick and really and go through some of the ways that you all have talked about how we can move towards the goal of zero waste. And I'm really going to focus on the municipal level, the city level, what the city of Baltimore can do. And so when we talk about investments and funds to improve the recycling infrastructure, the recycling bins, I heard that talked about in the presentation as they were supposed to come out in July. But what many do not know is that the education funds associated with those recycling bins were not necessarily as robust as they could have been in the budget. And so September is the start of the budgeting process, and we've already been talking with the mayor's administration about how we can increase education funds, not only just from a DPW perspective, but also from advocacy organizations that are in this space that know what they're talking about, so that we can build community champions to get this information out to communities. As a public health practitioner working in the health space, education and health education is one of the most difficult things to do to change behavior. And so we have to work aggressively, not only just providing those education dollars, but also developing curricula that start into the school system, really creating those partnerships with not only within the school system, but also within our philanthropic and corporate partners as well. I'm in conversations with University of Maryland about the sustainability and how corporate partners such as our hospitals, which are a major resource and money maker here in the city of Baltimore, how they can invest within sustainability models, such as zero waste, such as, diverting some of their medical waste, and also even just a percentage, 1 to 2 to 5% of their waste that they generate at that hospital into some of these new diversion programs that we're talking about, related to composting, related to recycling, related to solar and green roofs. So, when I want people to think about zero waste, it is not just, and I know that the topic of this presentation was, really reducing the aspects of incineration. But when I want people to think about environmentalism, I want people to think about it is so much more than just incineration. It is a comprehensive effort to really reduce our carbon footprint. And we have seen it, from the federal administration, from the Biden administration, from the state level, and all the way down to the city level. And we have to work aggressively because we're already behind the 8 ball. We are already behind the 8 ball when we're talking about the drastic effects of climate change, the drastic effects of incineration on our cities, on our concentrated cities, such as Memphis, such as Baltimore, such as Detroit, such as, the entire state of California. So really, kind of having that comprehensive approach. Number two, when we talk about standardized labeling and education at the city level, we need to make it clear to residents in the city that recycling is important. When you talk about, recycling to people in the city, it needs to be something that is understandable. It needs to be something that people can kind of pick up and say, hey, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. The elitism that has been prevailed within the environmentalism movement has shown and is we're seeing the effects of it now, whereby people aren't really understanding and really connecting the dots when it comes to environmentalism. So, what does it mean to save a plastic bag? People use plastic bags to, put their lunches together to take to work, put their grocery bags for your dog waste. So really changing the behavior of how people use things that we should move towards recycling. And lastly, when we're talking about just really diversion of materials, one of the things that I immediately kind of championed when I came into office was the Small Haulers Initiative. And it was a revamp from a previous program under former Mayor Young, whereby we are revamping the program to use small haulers to act as environmental champions. So they are helping to divert the mattresses that are going in the landfills. They are providing those types of illegal dumping and recycling efforts that are not going to the incinerator. And so speaking with Director Mitchell when he first came in, this was something that he had already started in Oakland. And so we've already began the process of really thinking through how we can reimagine that program here in Baltimore. Because one of the things that, I try to get really, people to see that are not from Baltimore. Baltimore is a very different animal than cities that you have been in before. And we need to really create the culture and the effect of Baltimore here in Baltimore, using Baltimore-based organizations and Baltimore-based people, because they are the people closest to the issue, but they're also the people closest to the solution as well. At the state level, one of the things that I know Delegate Learman have talked, Delegate Learman and Delegate Lewis and I have talked about include, really not only focusing on the consumer aspect of recycling, but also the manufacturers, talking with our manufacturing partners to see how we can move that needle to reduce zero waste as well, because we're not going to really truly have a reduction in zero waste if we not only focus on the consumer, but we neglect not only our manufacturers as well. And so making sure that, again, we are focusing at the state level of producing policies and legislation to support zero waste, but also support the true reduction and waste diversion of those materials into our zero waste plan and our diversion efforts. And lastly, with the composting effort. Again, when we're talking about zero waste, composting, 85% of organics can be diverted from zero, can be diverted from our waste stream. And that's an incredible amount of materials when we talk about our school system, the amount of waste that is just disregarded from our school, our school lunch programs, our hospital programs. Those are food waste that can be diverted and composted and reimagined and reused into something that really creates a way for Baltimore to kind of move towards zero waste. And so putting industry people like our hospitals, like our philanthropic partners, like our corporate partners in the room, that's where we at the city level can begin to really make a dent in that conversation. And lastly, from my office proper, when we're talking about goal setting, implementing the zero waste plan, that is something that I've committed to with both organizations, South Baltimore Community Land Trust, and also Baltimore's Clean Air Coalition, to really champion those initiatives coming from District 10, because District 10 is in my opinion, and I'm the council person for District 10, so I'm always going to advocate for District 10. It's the district most affected. It is, if you can argue that it's the district most affected by some of the disastrous effects that we are seeing in our city. And it's important that we not only build that political will and build that infrastructure at the city level amongst council members, but it's incumbent that you all keep the pressure not only on my office but also on the mayor's office as well, to uphold this zero waste initiative, but also, come with one thing I know Dante, I talked with him about developing and sharing ideas, because from a humbling perspective, not every elected leader in the city really understands what zero waste is. And so educating us, making us, aware of some of the things that we are doing, some of the direct and indirect factors of some of the policies that we are putting in place in Baltimore. That is what, I think at the city level, you all can continue to do. And so as I close out, my conversation related to zero waste, I can just implore you, again, keep the focus not only just on incineration, but zero waste and climate change as a whole, because it's definitely going to be an aspect that our children, our grandchildren are going to see. As we see the rising levels of temperature within the earth, we are going to see the drastic effects of how, things that we put in place now are able to kind of help us and help our children's children exist on this earth 50 to 60 years from now. So Dante, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on tonight to share my thoughts about zero waste, but also how we as a city and a state and a federal level can assist you all from a governmental perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Councilwoman Porter. I really appreciate you joining us and speaking to that. I mean, and absolutely, I feel like fighting climate change is waste. Fighting climate change is providing access to green space. Like Westport, for example, only has about 25% coverage, tree coverage. And like that's really small. And as temperatures get hotter, it's gonna be massive urban heat island effects, people dealing with more heat stroke, more asthma triggers, things like that. Like it has to be very comprehensive. So when we talk the zero waste aspect, we're also still talking the carbon aspect, the climate change bit. We still have to deal with actually investing in green space in the city, and beyond, and talking about solar and alternative energies, all of that. So I totally agree. This is just one nugget of a very large component of stuff that we have to fight. So we're at 8:51. We're gonna aim to try to get to 9 and end it, but we may squeeze over to 9:04, 9:05 to finish answering any questions. So
yeah, there's some questions in the chat that I want to bring up now if I can.
Right. So should we start with Alyssa's question from
that's
earlier?
what I was gonna say. Where does the plastic go once it goes in the blue bin? Overseas? Landfills? Does it really get recycled? And
absolutely. Excellent
that's
question.
a good question. And I think that's a question that a lot of us have in this room right now. Does it really get recycled?
Yeah, and so the answer to that is yes and no. So one of the things that we really want to talk about is that there are a lot of valuable plastics still in the waste stream. The problem is there also are a lot of invaluable ones. And so usually when you see like the chasing arrow sign on your containers, if it's a water bottle, if it's a medicine bottle, like your Tylenol is usually a thick white plastic, like those particular plastics have a really high value, like HDPE, the medicine bottle plastic, basically, and some of the cleaning bottles that you have in your household. That's like $1,000+ a ton to get all of that in one space. But a lot of it continues to be incinerated because we haven't, to the councilwoman's point, to James's point, everyone's point, to engage the community and like shift the mindset of where this material ought to go. And for aluminum, for example, like aluminum is incredibly valuable, like over $1,000 a ton right now, and yet it's only a small percentage of the waste stream. The majority of the waste stream that we have right now is paperboard and or cardboard and paper, mixed paper. So like there's so many materials that we're missing out on. But on those plastics, if we were able to create that comprehensive education approach through the city, through us, through other grassroots groups in the city, to talk about where these materials can go. We can maximize the ones that actually do get recycled right now and redesign out the ones that are less likely to be utilized. And so that's why it's kind of a yes and no. There are a lot of communities are bouncing back from China's national sword policy that blocked a lot of the low quality plastics. But that's why we also talked about the need for cleaning everything out when you put it in the recycling bin, because that food waste or whatever, that drink waste, can lead to contamination. And then all of a sudden this like potentially good bale of stuff that could be $1,000 or whatever can now go out the drain because it's just not up to the purity standard. So
Right.
plus right now we send our recyclables to a waste management, the company, not the idea, down in Elk Ridge, and we have to pay them $100 a ton for processing our recyclables. What we want to do is have the city either own a recycling facility in entirety or have a public-private partnership to where it can garner some revenue shares from that clean, marketable recyclables material. And so that's why it's so important to start shifting in that direction, because the more we prove that we can move away from that incinerator, the faster we will convince more people to do it. So that is hopefully answers Alyssa's question.
And ultimately, we would want anything that can't be recycled to go to a landfill versus incineration. So definitely landfilling is preferable to incineration. But if they're not getting into a recycling bin, they're getting burned. So that's why that's the purpose of this talk today.
Absolutely. So it looks like Alan asked, are we going to discuss what we can do to push for more education on recycling and give public housing residents the ability to recycle? I absolutely agree, Alan. We need to work with the city and local foundations, and to the councilwoman's point, local institutions that have a lot of resources and power to facilitate that aspect. Like, why should community members that are in public housing not have access to the same resources that other communities might? And by not providing this recycling access, that's one aspect, but also obviously the access to grocery stores, access to healthcare. I mean, there are so many components that institutions in the city need to participate in engaging and changing in order to make the city a better space. So like they can talk from their offices or whatever, but until they're putting money where their mouth is, and pushing and using their influence to make these things happen, we're not going to get as far as we could. But they need to work with the communities to build out the types of stuff that they need, and engage and see what's there. And so I think it's kind of a multifaceted component fight, but obviously we won't be able to get it all together in this conversation, but at least having this conversation right now can be a step to the next one, and so on and so forth. So engaging your council folks to push these institutions, to push the mayor, to push the council, to say, hey, like there are a ton of injustices when it comes to public housing versus single family homes or what have you in the city, but this is among them, and we would like to be able to change that as quickly as possible. What were some of the other questions?
Shouldn't it be the responsibility of some of the companies that make the plastic and profit from it to dispose of it? And absolutely, and that's where we get the support from extended producer responsibility bills. It's where we get the support with bottle bills. And these are bigger things that shift the responsibility from local governments and from individuals and back onto the corporations. People that are making this stuff should be held responsible for what they're making. We shouldn't be picking up their trash. And if we are, we should give them a bill for it.
Absolutely. And so, and that's the thing, that's like, that's essentially one of the biggest examples of like corporate socialism in the country. Basically, think about, you've got your giant companies, your Coca-Colas, or what have you, and they can produce this stuff, but once it's out there, the consumer has it, then they toss it, and then the city, not the company, now has to deal with whatever they produced. So we're fronting the costs for what they're doing. So as Steph said, extended producer responsibility laws basically say, hey, Coca-Cola, hey, Nestle, whatever, like, just as an example here, like, all right, for whatever, however 100 plastic bottles you give us or produce, basically, you got to pay like a $50 to contribute to dealing with that on the back end. And that incentivizes them to redesign that material. So now they don't have to pay that amount and they can just get it back to the company ultimately and use new products, or they can put those in a path in a given community to be reused as other products. So that's the kind of thing that EPR, extended producer responsibility laws, would do. Any other questions out of Facebook or here?
And it's 8:59.
Oh,
So
maybe I got them all. All right. But yeah, so I just want to thank everyone who either tuned in on Facebook or here in Zoom. I definitely want to thank James. I want to thank Councilwoman Porter and just everyone who wanted to come and check out what we wanted to chat about tonight. Obviously, we had to truncate it because we don't want to like bore people with like hours and hours of presentation, because this really could go that long. But you know, let's avoid that. So like Steph said, our next one will be about deconstruction, which is another avenue of waste. So instead of demolishing your houses, then in these communities that have just been vacated, which actually leads to asbestos being dispersed in the community, lead, things like that, you deconstruct it, you take it piece by piece, and now you can use that material for more valuable stuff, like we talked about with zero waste. So hopefully we'll have some more council representation on that one as well, and have some more folks that'll do some presenting on that. So thank you all again. I really appreciate the attendance, and hopefully we'll chat again soon. Feel free to email us, contact us, all that good stuff, and we'll talk more about it in the future.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Make sure you're following our Facebook. Make sure you've signed up for our emails, and we'll be in touch.